The seat was by the kitchen door, not near it, by it. Close enough that every time a server pushed through, Margaux felt the rush of warm air and the smell of whatever was being plated for everyone else's tables. Close enough that the noise made it difficult to hear anything. Close enough that it was obvious, to her, to the servers who glanced at her with something almost like apology, to the few people who noticed at all, that this was not a real seat at this party. It was a place to put someone you'd invited out of obligation and hoped would leave early. Margaux Delacroix had received the invitation 3 weeks before. A thick envelope, cream-colored, with gold-embossed lettering. Very impressive, very deliberate. She'd stood in the front hallway of her house in West Vancouver, holding it for a long time before she opened it. You are cordially invited to celebrate the launch of Harlow & Voss Creative Group. An evening of cocktails, dinner, and the unveiling of our new partnership. At the bottom, in handwritten ink, hope you can make it, would mean a lot. Damien. She'd set the card on the kitchen counter and walked away from it. Made coffee, stood at the window looking out at the water, came back, read it again. Damien Harlow. Her former business partner. The man who had, 2 years earlier, sat across from her in a boardroom on Robson Street with 2 lawyers present and told her, calmly, with that particular brand of politeness that is worse than outright cruelty, that the agency wasn't working with her creative direction anymore. That the company they had built together over 6 years needed to go in a different direction. That her vision, while appreciated, was no longer aligned with where Harlow Creative was headed. He'd bought out her shares at the lowest possible valuation. She'd been too shocked to fight it properly at the time. Too hollowed out by the betrayal to think clearly. She'd signed what her lawyer advised her to sign and walked out of the building on a gray Tuesday afternoon with a settlement that was technically fair and emotionally devastating. And now he was inviting her to watch him celebrate. Her assistant, a sharp young woman named Britta, who had followed Margaux from the old agency and never once mentioned looking for other work, had placed a post-it note beside the invitation. You don't have to go. Margaux had peeled off the note, folded it, put it in her jacket pocket. She went. The event was held at a venue in Gastown, one of those renovated warehouse spaces with exposed brick and Edison bulbs and a catering team in matching aprons. It looked expensive and considered, which was exactly what Damien was good at, surfaces. He understood surfaces the way some people understand languages, fluently, intuitively, without effort. Margaux arrived at 7 on time, which she immediately recognized as a mistake. The early arrivals were clustered near the bar, and she knew maybe 4 of them. The ones she knew looked briefly surprised to see her, then rearranged their expressions into something more neutral. A young man with a clipboard checked her name, found it, gave her a table number. Table 11. She didn't realize what table 11 was until she found it. A round table for 8, tucked behind a structural column, in the far corner closest to the service entrance. The flower arrangement in the center was smaller than the others. The chair she was pointed to face the wall rather than the room. She sat down. There were 2 other people already at the table. A man named Clive, who worked in print production and seemed equally confused about why he was there. And an older woman named Bernadette, who introduced herself as someone's aunt, and clearly hadn't been briefed on the nature of the event. They made polite conversation about the brick walls and whether the salmon looked good. Across the room, Damien Harlow held court near the main display. Large framed prints of the agency's new branding, photographs of their recent campaigns, a rolling reel playing on a screen behind him. He was 51, still handsome in the way that confident men often are, silver at his temples and a suit that fit very well. Beside him stood his new partner, a man named Vincent Voss, who Margaux had never met but had read about, younger, American, with a background in New York advertising. Neither of them looked toward table 11. The room filled up around her. The speeches started at 8. Damien took the microphone with the ease of someone who had rehearsed enough to seem unrehearsed, and he talked about vision and courage and the kind of creative risk that defines a legacy. He mentioned resilience. He mentioned the long road. He did not mention the people he'd pushed off it. Margaux drank her water. She ate the bread. She listened to Clive explain the difference between offset and digital printing, which was genuinely more interesting than what was happening at the microphone. At 20 minutes past 8, the doors opened again. She didn't notice right away. She was looking down, tracing the edge of her napkin with one finger, doing the quiet mental arithmetic of how long before she could leave without it being commented upon. 15 more minutes, she thought. Maybe 20. But then she saw the servers change. It was subtle. Subtle enough that most people in the room probably didn't catch it. But Margaux had spent her career in rooms like this, watching how people moved and what that movement communicated, and she saw it clearly. The server nearest the kitchen door, a young woman who had been moving efficiently and impersonally all evening, straightened, not dramatically, just an adjustment, a shift in attention. 2 other staff members near the bar exchanged a glance. The woman in the black blazer, who had been managing the event from a clipboard by the entrance, the one who had been calm and efficient all night, suddenly broke off from her conversation and moved quickly toward the front of the room. Margaux turned in her chair, standing just inside the entrance, removing his coat and handing it without looking to someone who appeared to work for him, was a man she recognized, Lachlan Price. She had not mentioned to anyone that she knew Lachlan Price. She had not mentioned it when she'd RSVP'd, had not mentioned it when Britta had raised an eyebrow at the invitation, had not mentioned it when her husband had driven her to the venue and kissed her on the cheek and said, "Are you sure about this?" She had been sure. She had simply not explained exactly why. Lachlan was 55 years old and had, over the past decade and a half, built something that could only be described as a media and communications empire, though he found that phrase embarrassing and refused to use it himself. He was the kind of man who owned things quietly, who appeared on lists, not the flashy ones with glossy photos, but the measured, carefully researched ones in publications that didn't put faces on their covers. His name was known in certain rooms and completely unknown in others, which was exactly as he preferred it. He was also Margaux's husband. Had been for 3 years. They had met at a foundation dinner in Toronto 2 winters after she'd left the agency. She'd been there representing a client. He'd been there because he was on the board. They had ended up in the same conversation by accident, had talked for 2 hours and had subsequently spent 6 months pretending that the conversation hadn't meant what it clearly meant. The wedding had been very small. Britta had been there, her sister, 4 of his closest people. No announcement, no feature in any publication, no social media. Lachlan was not on social media and Margaux had stopped caring about it. She had never hidden the marriage, she simply hadn't publicized it and no one at her old agency had thought to ask. She watched him scan the room. She didn't wave. She didn't stand, she just waited, the way you wait when you already know the ending of a story and are simply watching it arrive. He found her. The change in his path was small, a slight redirect, easy, unhurried. He moved through the room the way he always moved through rooms, without announcing himself, without requiring space, but somehow creating it anyway. People stepped aside without quite knowing they were doing it. The event manager appeared at his elbow almost immediately, murmuring something with the focused attention of someone who has just recalculated the importance of their evening. He reached table 11, pulled out the chair beside her, the one facing the wall, and sat down. "How's the bread?" he asked. "Better than the speeches," she said. He picked up a piece, considered it, set it down. "The salmon? Clive says it looks good." Lachlan looked at Clive, who had frozen in the particular way that people freeze when someone they weren't expecting arrives in their peripheral vision and doesn't match any category they had prepared for. "Good to know," Lachlan said pleasantly. He introduced himself to Clive and to Bernadette, who told him it was a lovely party, and asked if he knew the groom, which, given that this was not a wedding, suggested she had perhaps misread the invitation entirely. Lachlan told her it was a lovely party indeed and engaged her briefly about where she was visiting from. Margaux turned back to the room. She could see the moment it started. The way awareness travels in a room full of people who are professionally attuned to status. It didn't happen all at once. It happened the way a tide comes in, gradually, then suddenly, then you realize the water is already at your feet. A whisper here. A phone screen checked, a head turned. The communications director for a large Vancouver media company stood near the drinks table and went very still when she looked toward table 11, and then said something quietly to the person beside her. Vincent Voss, Damien's new American partner, noticed first. She saw him do it. Saw him glance toward the entrance for the 3rd time in as many minutes. The way you do when you're tracking someone important you've been told to expect. And then recalibrate when his gaze landed on table 11 instead. And then go very still in the way that means you are trying to process something that doesn't fit the map you were given. He leaned toward Damien and said something. Margaux watched Damien's face. There are moments that a person's face does not perform. When the gap between what someone knows and what they understood arrives too fast for any amount of social fluency to cover it. Damien Harlow was very good at his face. He had spent his career constructing and managing expressions. But in the moment he turned from Vincent toward table 11 and saw his former partner sitting beside Lachlan Price, not near him, not accidentally adjacent but beside him, comfortably, the way people sit beside their own lives, his face did not perform, it simply registered. Margaux looked away before he could collect himself. She had not come here for that moment, or at least she had not allowed herself to admit that she had, but seeing it arrive and then looking away from it felt like the correct choice. Taking it would have made it small. Leaving it where it was, let it be what it was. "He's coming over," Lachlan said quietly, without looking up from his plate. "I know, do you want me to?" "No," she said. "Stay exactly where you are." She heard the approach before she saw it. The particular rhythm of someone crossing a room with purpose and controlled speed, which is distinct from the rhythm of someone crossing a room because they want to. Damien arrived at the table and stopped. "Margaux." His voice was warm, practiced. "I'm so glad you came." She looked up at him. "Damien, congratulations on the launch." "Thank you." He was looking at Lachlan. There was no way not to look at Lachlan. "I don't think we've—" Lachlan Price. Lachlan extended a hand with outstanding, which was a particular kind of signal to anyone paying attention. Damien shook it. "Of course," Damien said, which was the thing people said when they were buying themselves time. "I didn't realize you two knew each other." "We're married," Margaux said simply. Not unkindly, just clearly. The sentence landed. She watched it land. Damien's expression moved through several small adjustments in rapid succession. Surprise, recalculation. Something that might have been a memory of the valuation he'd assigned her shares. Something else that she didn't have a precise name for but recognized as the specific weight of a person understanding that they have misjudged something significantly. "I didn't know that," he said. "No," she agreed. "A lot of people don't." There was a pause. The kind that everyone in earshot was very focused on not appearing to notice. "Well," Damien said, "I hope you'll both stay for dessert. I'd love a chance to catch up properly." "We'll see how the evening goes," Margaux said. He nodded. He smiled. He walked back toward the center of the room in the careful, even way of a man who is very focused on how his walk looks right now. Lachlan refilled her water glass. "He gave you a table by the kitchen," he said. "He did deliberately, almost certainly." Lachlan set down the water pitcher. He didn't say anything else for a moment. He didn't need to. They had been married long enough that she knew the particular quality of his silence. When he was deciding not to do something. Not out of indifference but out of the understanding that she didn't need him to. "I thought," she said, "that if I was going to be here at all you might as well be here too. I had nothing on tonight anyway." "I know. I checked your calendar." He smiled at that, the small one she'd always liked best. "So you planned this." She considered the word. "I planned to come. You were on your way back from Calgary." The timing worked out. She looked at the room, at the people who were no longer bothering to be subtle about looking their way. At Damien Harlow now talking to someone with a slight over-intensity that suggested he was no longer entirely present in the conversation. At the framed prints of the new agency's branding on the walls, clean and confident, and entirely built on the foundation that she and Damien had laid together in the years before he'd decided she was expendable. "I didn't plan all of it. Just most of it, just enough of it." The dinner continued. The speeches wound down. The room rearranged itself in the way that rooms do after a disruption. Not obviously, not dramatically, but differently than it had been arranged before. People who had not found their way to table 11 earlier found reasons to pass by it now. The communications director came over with 2 colleagues and spent 15 minutes in what appeared to be a genuine and slightly intense conversation with Lachlan about something Margaux didn't need to follow because she had heard versions of it many times. The event manager appeared twice to check if they needed anything, each time with a degree of attention that stood in noticeable contrast to the beginning of the evening. Clive, to his credit, seemed entirely unbothered by any of this and talked to Bernadette about his daughter's hockey league. Damien did not come back to table 11. He tried once, from across the room. Caught Margaux's eye and raised his glass slightly in a gesture that might have been a toast or might have been something else. She raised hers in return, which was a complete and sufficient reply. At 9:30, Lachlan stood and put on his jacket. Margaux stood. They said goodbye to Clive, who told them it had been a pleasure, and to Bernadette, who said she hoped they'd enjoy the rest of the celebration. Neither she nor Lachlan corrected the framing. They walked out through the main room, not quickly, not slowly. The pace of people who are leaving because they're ready to, not because they're making a point. At the door, Margaux stopped and turned back once. She wasn't sure why. Maybe to make sure it had happened the way she remembered it, that the room was real and the evening was real, and Damien Harlow was standing across it, looking at her with the expression of a man who has spent an entire evening revising a story he thought he already knew the end of. She turned back around. Outside, the November air was cold and clean the way it gets in Vancouver after rain, the streets reflecting light in long uneven lines. Lachlan's driver was waiting. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment before getting in, her breath visible, her hands in her coat pockets. "You all right?" Lachlan asked. She thought about it honestly, the way she'd learned to do. Not reflexively, not with the answer she was supposed to give, but with the actual question. Was she all right? She thought about the 6 years she had spent building something that someone else had decided she wasn't worth keeping. The Tuesday afternoon, the boardroom, the lawyers, the valuation, the gray sky outside the window on Robson Street, the post-it note. "You don't have to go." She thought about everything that had come after that, the year of being quiet, the slow, deliberate work of building something again. Not for anyone, not to prove anything, but because it turned out that she was, at her core, a person who needed to be building something. The clients who had followed her, the ones who had found her, the ones who had introduced her to someone at a foundation dinner in Toronto on a winter evening when she hadn't particularly felt like going. She thought about the seat by the kitchen door, the smaller flower arrangement, the wall she'd been facing when Lachlan walked in. Yes, she said. She meant it. She got in the car. The city moved past the windows, rain slicked and lit up, indifferent and beautiful in the way that cities are when you're watching them from inside something warm. Lachlan was reading something on his phone, the low light of the screen catching the side of his face. She watched the street. She had not gone to the launch to embarrass Damien Harlow. She had gone, if she was honest, because there was a version of herself that needed to be in that room. Not to perform strength, not to stage anything, but to simply exist in a space where she had once been made to feel small, and find out whether it still felt that way. It didn't. That was the only answer she had needed, and she hadn't needed anyone else to witness her getting it. The fact that the room had witnessed it anyway was a consequence, not a goal. She thought about what Damien's face had looked like when he'd understood. She thought about how she had looked away before he collected himself. That part she did not regret. There is a kind of vindication that requires an audience, that needs to be seen and commented upon to feel real. And then there is another kind, quieter, less photogenic, more durable, that arrives in a room when you're facing a wall and realizes it doesn't need the room to notice. Margaux had spent 2 years learning to want the second kind. She hadn't always managed it. But tonight, she thought, she had come close. Britta texted at 9:50, "How was it?" "Margaux, bread was good." A pause. Then, "Did he seat you somewhere terrible?" She smiled at her phone. "Kitchen door. Unbelievable. Are you okay?" She looked out the window at the city, still moving, still lit up, still completely uninterested in any of what had just happened, which was one of the things she had always found most useful about cities. "More than," she typed back, and then she put her phone in her pocket and let the rest of the drive pass in silence, watching Vancouver blur and brighten through the glass, already thinking about the morning.